This is the 40th episode of the Mining Your Business podcast, a show all about process mining, data science, and advanced business analytics. You know, we've done a lot of things in the previous 39 episodes, but you know what we've never done? Being a CEO of a company and being acquired by Microsoft. Luckily, our guest has done just that. James Denning, former CEO of Minit, now partner at Microsoft, is here to tell us all about Minit and the recent acquisition by Microsoft. Let's get into it.
When I was younger and read about these major tech acquisitions, I thought to myself, oh wow, this tech world, this is just crazy. I wonder how it works behind the curtains. Little did I know that I would have an amazing opportunity to discuss all of this with a CEO of such a company. Ladies and gentlemen, you're listening to the 40th episode. Patrick, 40th episode, that's crazy.
That is pretty crazy.
40th episode of Mining Your Business podcast, the only podcast focused on process mining out there. And joining us today is now a partner at Microsoft, former CEO of Minit Process Mining, James Denning. James, welcome to our show. We are super excited to have you on.
Guys, lovely to be here. Thank you for having me.
James, is it true that once you get acquired by a major tech company, you can basically chill on the beach in the Caribbean, sipping on a cocktail with a cherry on top and enjoying your life for the rest of the days?
So I'm sat here in East Anglia, about 10 miles north of Cambridge in the UK, and I'm looking out across wheat fields rather than a beach. And I've checked my office, and nobody in my family seems to have bought me any sort of cocktail this morning. So no, I can very honestly say that it's a different sort of fast. But it's not. You're not sat back on a beach. Certainly not working for one of the a company like Microsoft. Microsoft, obviously, hugely well-known company. You know, in my opinion, one of the great tech companies. We've all used Microsoft products. I've been using them for, crikey, decades since I started as a software engineer, and even before that. There is that customer-centric attitude that I think companies like Microsoft enjoy. That takes work. It takes hard work. So no cocktails on the beach for me just yet.
Not to mention that if we're still talking about cocktails in UK, we'll probably set up or settle for a pint of beer. So
and I'll happily settle for a pint of beer.
That makes two of us. Anyway, James, we will definitely talk more into the acquisition because this is something that we haven't discussed on the show yet, and frankly, this is just an amazing opportunity for both us, but also our listeners to dive into this a little more. But first things first, how did you get into process mining? I mean, your journey is pretty, you worked in Automation Anywhere, H2O AI, and now CEO of Minit. How did you get there?
So I've always been interested in how businesses work, in that whole process piece. And I remember when I moved from being, I started as a software engineer. For the simple reason I had a degree in computer science. I loved writing software. I hung out in the computer room at school for many years. I started writing software when I was I was part of that Sinclair ZX81 Spectrum BBC Model B generation. And I think if you talk to anyone, I'm 51 years old. If you talk to anyone my age in the UK who's in technology, they will recount the same kind of technological journey of through the different personal computers. And when I moved from being a software engineer to being more of a management and leadership role, I was fascinated by the science of how businesses worked. How did those processes work? And I found that there was a whole field of process design and process management. And I've always been interested in how the universe works. My first degree was in physics because I was interested in what happens when you flick a light switch. Where do electrons go to, and what are the building blocks of the universe? And software was the same. If you look at something that we take for granted now, you swipe, something on an iPhone screen. That background in software to me kind of opened up all of the things that happen when you do that. The layer upon layer upon layer of code and libraries and all those things down to some of the fundamentals of, we're going to add these two numbers together, compare them. And if it's zero, we jump to a different, point in our executable code base. And I got the opportunity back about 6 years ago to go to Automation Anywhere. And Automation Anywhere was all about processes. And before that, I'd been in various sales roles. But Automation Anywhere, for me, was a bit of an eye-opener. I stood outside King's Cross Station for about 2 hours, 2.25 hours, for having my first phone call with a guy called Mark Fletcher. That was the guy who hired me and I worked for many years, still a really good friend of mine. And we talked about RPA. And to me, RPA, it was just such an obvious solution that was going to go big. Because I looked at my job. I was a sales and marketing director at a telecoms company. And I looked at my job and kind of went, well, I could automate that and all of that bit, a bit of that, probably none of that, but some of that bit. And I looked at my job and all the things, the bits of the business that I had reporting into me and thought, wow, there's so much opportunity there. So for me, it was the bridge of being interested in processes and being interested in designing processes and then going into a company where we had a product that was, RPA, automation, that was directly related to those processes. So that was the first kind of step on the journey into actually being a vendor in that process insights, that process mining world.
Right. So I'm imagining that when you saw the process mining, the process explorer, the entire graph and stuff, your mind went immediately to, well, how does that work? How do we go from just random data into this graph of a process of spanning millions and millions of cases with activities and things like that, right?
Yeah, I think automation is one approach to improving your processes. Fundamentally, if you have a process, what you care about as somebody in the business is how do I get the best outcomes to that process for the least cost? And I use cost in a very loose sense, people, time, money. So, and there are two ways to do that, really. You can find a way of decreasing the cost it takes to operate that process, or you can make the process more efficient. Automation is very much about, throw cheaper resource, and I'm generalizing a lot here, I appreciate, but, throw cheaper resource at the product, at the process, and you'll get, hopefully just as good outcomes, but for a fraction of the cost of if you have people operating it. If you go to a management consultancy and say, we've got a process, they'll charge you lots of money, but, hopefully they'll say, well, here's a way to make that process more efficient. But something that occurred to me a while back is we're operating slightly in the dark. We kind of have our suspicions about how well processes are working, but we haven't really got to a point yet, and this is where process mining comes in, where we really understand the reality of how well that process is working. We often understand the theory. We'll go and do, some process analysis. We'll get consultants in. We'll do some task mining. And we know the theory of how that process is meant to work. But in my experience, it's not the 80 or 90 or 95% of the time that a process, an instance of the process that you start, it's not that 90% of the time that it goes through the happy path that causes you problems. It's the 10% or 5% or 1%, whatever, where it goes through a slightly weird path that you may not have predicted and you may not even know about. That's where the problems come in. That's where you get those outliers, and it's the outliers. I mean, we talk about the 80-20 rule. It's the 20% of outliers that cause you 80% of the problems. Maybe it's the 99-1 rule for processes. But the advantage of instrumenting your processes, and this is for me the heart of the whole thing, is it gives you insight into the reality of how well any specific process is working. And that's really important, because only if you understand that can you decide, do we need to throw automation at it? Do we need to fundamentally re-engineer that process? Or is it fine? Can we leave it alone and go and focus our time and money and attention on something else?
So if you imagine the promises of process mining, savings in X amount of millions and efficiency, making your process so much more efficient, do you think process mining is delivering on these promises?
I think it's starting to, yeah. There are use cases that I've seen, real customers that I've seen, where people have had very big chunks of their business, and they've used process mining to guide them into the best way to improve or optimize those processes. And they have seen millions or tens of $1 million of improvement. Big businesses churn out lots and lots of output. There are big numbers floating around. We have $1 billion businesses. They turn over billions or tens of billions of dollars. Product comes in, or supplies come in, material comes in, product goes out. You don't need to find a huge amount in percentage terms in way of optimization on the process for that to make, a huge difference. If you're, I don't know, BMW, and you've got 20,000 invoices a week, if you can improve your, 20,000 orders being placed on you a week by dealers, by whatever, if you can improve your order to cash by a couple of days, that has a massive financial effect on the business. So no, I think given the times we live in now, where businesses need to be more efficient to survive and thrive, I think process mining is absolutely delivering on bringing out that reality to us. And remember, process mining itself gives you insight into what's happening. The really important bit, the only important bit, is how that insight is then used to deliver a better business outcome. And it's something I wrote down some tenets the other day. And one of the core tenets is insight is not enough. You must have actionable, there must be action, there must be an outcome tied to those insights. Without that, what's the point?
Right.
So James, what did your experience bring on the table when you became a CEO of Minit? Because I find it fascinating that the vision that you already had, that you brought in, working in automation anywhere and seeing the processes from, I would say, a little different perspective, and then you basically come in and become this CEO of process mining, of process mining vendor company. First of all, how did it happen? And second of all, what did you bring on the table specifically?
So how it happened is quite a good story. I had a really good guy working for me at Automation Anywhere called Martin Atherton. Martin, he's a good guy, he's a good friend. He was running our partner business back then. And he came to me, or one of his, I think it was Martin and one of his team came to me a while back and said, "Hey, have you heard of this company called Minit?" And I went, "No." And he goes, "Listen, they're process mining. They're small at the moment, but the product's fantastic. And they're really going places. And I keep an eye on them." And I thought, okay, that's a good steer. And a year later, or a year and a half later, I was just starting to think about leaving Automation Anywhere. I've been there for 4 years. We'd kind of built the EMEA operation up in, I was one of the first couple of people on the ground. There's always a bit of a pub argument, whether it's me or my friend Arno with the very first person. But we'd built this business up into something quite significant. We had a few hundred staff. And I've been there for 4 years, fully vested, all that good stuff, and kind of, done everything I was going to do in Europe. Wasn't particularly interested in moving to the US, and I contacted Minit. I thought that was really interesting, and they'd just hired a new CRO, and I went, okay, I've missed the boat a bit here, and so I went, I did something else. I joined H2O, great company, inspirational CEO there. But about 8 months into that, I got a call from a headhunter saying, would you be interested in working for Minit? And I said, well, they've just filled the CRO position. They said, well, no, we were looking at maybe you coming in as CEO. And I kind of went, super. And I hadn't really got to that point in my career where I was actively looking for CEO roles. It was always something I knew I was going to want to do at some point.
Yeah.
But I didn't think I was quite there yet. But I had a think, and I thought, listen, with the atmosphere that we had at this 18 months ago, being offered a job as the CEO of a tech company was like being offered a job as a Premiership footballer. This was an amazing opportunity. So I went and talked to them. I met the investors, met the founder, Rasto Klavak. He's great guy, really visionary. Felt I could work with him. It was one of my key aims, was to make sure that he stayed in the company, and he does. He still reports into me now at Microsoft. And thought, what, it's a great space. I really, process mining felt like where we'd been 5 years previously in software automation in RPA. That it was right on the cusp of becoming a major category. It would deliver really, really cool outcomes for businesses. Why wouldn't I want to do it? And so with regret, I said goodbye to H2O and I joined Minit.
Right. What were your goals coming into this position? Because first of all, I guess nobody really prepares you for a position of a CEO. It's not like you learn it in school. It's usually come with a lot of experience. You kind of have to have this vision, what you want to achieve. Did you come to the company and were thinking, wow, let's build it up in a way that somebody bigger eventually comes in and buys us in? Or how did you formulate this idea in your head that, what were you bringing there? What did you want to achieve once you were there as a CEO?
So it's a great question. In some ways, there wasn't a specific tangible goal about being acquired or going to IPO or whatever. I wanted to build the company. I remember the phrase I used. I wanted to build the company into something significant. However you measure that, ARR is the obvious kind of measure because that's, what gets you to an exit. I wanted to run a company well. I wanted to kind of be an enlightened CEO and be very collegiate. A lot of stuff I learned in my Amazon days. I wanted to take some of the great stuff I'd learned from previous leaders of mine. How we did hypergrowth at Automation Anywhere was something I wanted to take to the table. I learned a lot from Mark Fletcher, about how to do that, how to build business structures and sales structures to do that really well. There was some soft skills I learned about team building that I really wanted to kind of bring from my time at previous employers. Mm-hmm. There were some things I'd seen from previous leaders I didn't want to bring along. There were things where I thought, no, I don't think I like that. I don't think I want to do it like that. So I wanted to kind of be a really good CEO. It sounds silly, but I wanted to kind of be somebody that people would want to go back and work for. I wanted to grow the company. If there was any tangible financial goal, it was I wanted to be a unicorn. I wanted to get us to a $1 billion valuation. But it was just that feeling of doing something significant. So what did I bring? I think I brought the experience of how to grow an enterprise software business very rapidly. I won't disclose the numbers, but we grew Automation Anywhere in the first 3-4 years. It was going like wildfire. We were just chunk, 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 forget this kind of 20%, 40%, growth a year. It was way bigger than that. And Amazon as well. I used to work for Amazon. Amazon as a massive company was growing at 40% a year, which might not sound like a huge number, but that means you're doubling in size every 2 years. I remember having a great conversation with a guy called Alan Lyle. I think he's now head of logistics for Wayfair. And we were talking over a beer in the garden in Luxembourg. And he said, you realize the implication of that, James, is right now I've got, 90 fulfillment centers in Europe. The implication of that is in the next 2 years, I need to build another 90 fulfillment centers. So that's like one a week. And when you look at it like that, you kind of go, holy crap. Yeah, that's a really big, that's a big hill to climb. He was a very smart guy. He figured that out. But I think what I brought was, that ability to drive revenue. I think there was a lot of stuff about the science behind leadership and bringing all of those experiences into the company. I did a fair amount of preparation. I talked to other CEOs. The specific situation there of a new CEO being brought in to replace a founder CEO, and that founder CEO being in the business, there was an obvious failure mode there. There was an obvious failure point there. And I talked to a couple of guys I knew who'd been in that situation. I got some great advice from some senior leads I really respected. Wade Burgess used to be at Automation Anywhere, was really good. Mihir Shukla, my CEO at Automation Anywhere, was great. Mm-hmm. Dr. Charles Woodburn, who's the CEO of British Aerospace. We went to school together. We're really good friends. And Charlie gave me some great advice. He said, James, 3 things, get the best people you possibly can, reward them as well as you possibly can, and then just stay the hell out of their way. And that's always kind of stuck with me, that, get great people and remove the obstacles from their path, enable them, genuinely create a culture of empowerment rather than seek to manage them. And that makes total sense to me. If I'm hiring somebody to lead marketing or HR or sales or product, they should almost by definition be better than me at that job. Yeah. They should be an expert in that job. So my goal needs to be to get the right people in the building, make sure those people, give them the atmosphere and the culture. Remember, culture eats strategy for breakfast, yeah? Give them that environment where they can thrive and do their best work and remove obstacles from their way. And then do the stuff that only CEOs can do. Make sure there's enough money in the bank, deal with investors, all that stuff, set the big goals. But fundamentally, I wanted that culture of empowerment. And I think I succeeded.
That's great. I mean, it's really interesting to hear that journey from just being a software engineer to climbing to going through the ringer of all these different jobs, getting the exposure and all these things, and now being the CEO of Minit. What do you think are some of the key qualities that you need to have to do that job as a CEO? And do you think your experience in software engineering kind of played a key part in that, or not at all?
I think the key qualities are the main one, and I think many people struggle with this, and I think I've certainly struggled with this in the past. One of them is humility. You don't want to be, the old adage of if you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room. I think a great CEO gets the best out of the people around them, and they're comfortable with other people being better, brighter, sharper, whatever, axis you want to measure it on. They're comfortable with people exceeding them.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I probably struggled with that, maybe in my 20s and 30s, and I'm sure people who knew me back then will be listening to this and putting their eyes past saying, James, you weren't the humblest or most modest of people that way. And I think that's probably very true. But I think if you want to make that breakthrough to, being a CEO, to being a senior leader, you need to find the best people in, and preferably those people are better than you. There were a few key moments in my career that helped with that. The first one was, a couple of them were at Amazon. So Amazon, great company, really well managed. But, bit of a meat grinder, it's a hard place to work. But there are some things I think they do very well. Hiring, I remember somebody saying to me, whenever you hire somebody, you should be looking to hire somebody who can teach you something. Grade A managers hire grade A staff, grade B managers hire grade C staff. And I've seen that in my career. I've seen people scared to hire somebody who was a brighter star than they were because job security. They didn't want to be eclipsed by people working with them. I've never really had that, maybe innate confidence. I've never had that problem. I have people work for me. I mentioned Rasto earlier. Rasto is brilliant. He founded the company, man. He had all these great ideas, and he did that hard bit of taking it from an idea to actually being a real company with real staff and revenue and all that stuff. I haven't done that. Well, I have, but in a much smaller way. But that's great. I've got my head of operations, and I'm going to give her a call out because it'll make her blush. Zuzana Vanchova, super smart, cleverer than me. One of the sharpest people I've ever met. And having people of that caliber work for you is a massive boon. I couldn't do what I do. I couldn't lead a business, and now leading it within Microsoft, without those astonishing people. So the first learning is be comfortable with people who are better than you and brighter than you working for you. I think that's a really big thing. The second thing is think about what the best thing you can do in any given situation around empowering the people around you. If I'm in a meeting, I try hard. I think, again, going back 20 years, I found it very easy to dominate meetings. I'm quite big. Physically, I'm a big guy. I'm a former rugby player. I'm quite loud. I'm quite passionate about what I speak about. I have lots of ideas, and it's very easy to let someone like me with those characteristics dominate a meeting. So being able to kind of manage a bit more from behind, being able to retreat into the background and let other people get some space in the room, and to empower them to talk and have their ideas. And maybe the best thing for me to do in a meeting might be just go make coffee for everybody because the bright people are speaking. I think that's the other big learning. Make sure there are room for other people to bring their best to the table. And again, that is about creating that culture of empowerment. I'll give you one last one. Be a decent person. There is... I remember being asked by I think she was about 10 years old. She's now 18. My younger daughter, Katie. I remember her saying to me, when she was young, did you do good things at work today? And I was able to look her in the eye and say, yeah, I did. So I think having a strong moral compass, being a decent person, I think that's so important. And in some ways that overrides any aims or thoughts or considerations you should have about profit and personal success and. I think we all have an innate responsibility to be, good people.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I love what I'm hearing, Patrick. I think we've got a lot to learn from James over here. Being the smartest person in the room, I think that goes a long way for both of us. James, you already mentioned it, and I also found it very intriguing to discuss a little bit. How was this exchange of, let's say, the reign of the company? Because you basically replaced a founder CEO and became a new CEO. Was there ever a moment of friction, or how does this cooperation go? How did you even work together and brought ideas together and agreed on the future heading and future of the company? Really,
it was really interesting. It was a really big worry for me, and Rasto, really sharp guy, had built up the company. And the investors made it clear that I was in charge. There was no, you must keep, they were quite brutal in some ways about saying, listen, whatever you need to succeed, hey, they're investors, that's what they want is success. But I wrote down my kind of 4 key aims for what I wanted to achieve in the first year with Minit. And one of them was keep Rasto in the building. For very selfish reasons. He's really bright. He knows where all the bodies are buried. He knows the industry really well. He's a really well-regarded industry spokesman. He still handles all our analyst relations. He was such a great asset that I remember thinking, I have to keep this guy. Your success as a leader is the team you have around you. And I have to keep this guy. And honestly, we've had a really harmonious relationship from day one. When I first met him, we just got on really well. And throughout our time, there was, and I can think of one moment of friction, which was in the acquisition process. There were some personal terms, and I was a bit knackered and a bit grouchy at this point after, 5 months of being sat in the room with lawyers. And there was one point where I said, oh, Rasto, just sign it. Just sign the thing, but genuinely, in all the time, in the 18 months we've been, worked together, that's literally the only moment of friction. And I put that down almost entirely to Rasto. It takes an enormous amount of humility and, I suppose, what's the right word? Personal strength to not only, step sideways, step down from being the CEO, but to stay in the business, report to the new CEO, bring him your A game every day, publicly support him. And he did that nonstop. And for that, I am Rasto. If you ever listen to this, thank you, mate. Dziękuję. So a very small amount of Slovakian I can speak. It was quite astonishing. I talked last night to one of our investors, and he said, "Yeah, tell me about how did you Rasto do that?" I said, "Honestly, it was Rasto. It's easy for me to be magnanimous. I'm the new CEO. It's much harder for him to give me all that support. Not only putting his best foot forward in terms of the output, but doing it with a good grace and doing it with a smile on his face and as a friend. So, you talk about people making friends for life. Rasta and I, we got there very quickly, and I'm deeply, deeply grateful to him.
Mm-hmm. So, James, at what point, let's say that you are now the CEO of the company, at what point did it start? Was there this idea on the horizon that there could be this acquisition? Were you brought in and there were already talks about that? Or did it come up later on when you entered?
Not at all.
Not at all.
It's, we always knew there would be an exit at some point. We weren't just going to kind of carry on. And, we had investors. At some point, investors want that investment to be crystallized. And those funds have a limited lifespan. So there's probably, I think if you put me on the spot back then, I would have said, I don't know, 4 years. And we need to get to where we're going to get to in 3, 4, 5 years, and there'll be an exit of some sort. But there absolutely wasn't right. How quickly can we exit this company? So no, there was never that plan. We had some inbound interest that we said no to from various places. We had a plan. We had funding. We knew where we were going. We were confident in our business. And it took, it took a company of the caliber of Microsoft to come in and make a serious offer that got our attention.
Now, is the choice of the company that buys you is obviously an important choice. Did you have some sort of idea who you would like to sell to? Did you have some sort of preferred list, or did you, as soon as Microsoft came through the door, knock down the door and said, "Hey, we're interested," you started listening immediately? Or what did that actually look like? How did that initial contact come about?
So we'd had contact with Microsoft for years, I think, just through personal relationships. But there was no list. There was no kind of. I mean, if you'd asked me, I probably could have, said, well, it's this sort of company. And I probably had in my mind who the likely candidates were based around the space we were operating in, the size of those companies. But no, there was no list. But slightly amusingly, I remember talking to Yaro Zubak, when this all happened, and he said, it's probably it's a slightly funny story. I remember thinking, like, years ago, from an engineering point of view, if we were ever going to be acquired, I'd love it to be Microsoft. That would be like my life work complete, because this is the greatest software company in the history of the world. Wouldn't it be amazing if that code base and that IP that me and my team have developed, if it became part of Microsoft? That would be a real wow moment. So, so there you go, Yarrow. I'm glad we managed to tick that life achievement for you. But no, there was never a list. Things just happened.
Now, James, how does such an acquisition look like? Do you just meet in a bar over the pint of beer, and the guy from Microsoft just writes a sum of money on the paper? He just hands it over to you, and you're like, all right, you got a deal.
So I'll be a little bit coy. We, speaking as a partner of Microsoft, we don't discuss our acquisitions. Right. But it's. I won't tell you about the process, but the process is far stranger in some ways and far more mundane in other ways than you can possibly imagine. You come out of it kind of going, wow. I certainly learned an enormous amount. I mean, the whole process goes on for months. If you look at really big acquisitions, they go on for years, of due diligence and regulatory inquiries and whatever. I've never done anything like it. There was stuff you learn, just stuff you go, really? Is that a thing? The whole mechanics of it and the legal process and how definitive agreements, the stock purchase agreements work and warranties and all this stuff. Yeah. And until you've actually done it, you kind of don't know this stuff, So it was really hard. I'll be clear about that. It was because as the CEO, you're in the middle of all of this, and you're essentially negotiating between not just kind of you and Microsoft in this case, but you've got all your different sellers, all the different funds. And whilst we had 3 major investors, we had a lot more minor investors. They all have, and some of our minor investors were really big investment funds. And they all have teams of lawyers. So you're kind of negotiating a 15-way agreement. Plus, you've got due diligence, which is massive. You're literally turning out every single document that's ever passed through the company. Everyone who's ever worked, all of this stuff. Yeah, and this isn't Microsoft specific. This is in general. So it's a really hard process, and at the same time, you're trying to keep the business running. Yeah. I think the last 17 days we were working 21-hour days, 17 days in a row. By we, I mean me, my COO. And the lawyers. So it's a really hard process, but it's really interesting and you learn a lot. It's just stuff that I don't think you'll ever learn unless you've actually been through it and done it. So I look back at it. For the first month, I didn't want to look back at it at all. It was ghastly. I came out slightly, more than slightly bruised. But I look back now and go, wow, that was a really interesting learning experience.
What is happening inside of the company that is being acquired? Why this is all going on? How does the general vibes around the office are around this? How do you even prepare the company for that? And what is happening on the ongoing basis, on let's say the day-to-day basis in such a company when you are expecting to be acquired like within a couple of weeks or months?
So the weird thing is there's no changes because you keep it quiet. It's. If you're being acquired by a large company, keeping it secret is absolutely paramount because if news gets out, For any so this isn't just any publicly traded company, you have to be very careful about anything that might influence stock price, share price, because you've got, tens, hundreds, of millions of dollars at stake, and the regulators take a very dim view. So you keep it completely confidential until really right at the last minute, because you don't want the news to leak out to the market. So so it's a bit of a weird situation, because you've got a few of us who are literally like, you're not going to see me now for 4 months, and so you're trying to kind of keep the shit going, but it's it becomes obvious, I think, after a while, that something is happening. And, that's something, for us, it was, we had a fairly obvious cover story of we're looking to raise investment, and there's a huge amount of very similar work. But yeah, you've got a lot of paddling beneath the surface from a few people, a very small team. My leadership team knew after a while. And we actually did a really good job. I'm very proud team. We did keep the whole thing, pretty quiet. We had, a protocol for if the news got out, and we never had to invoke it. But yeah, you don't, it's not something you publicize within the company. You can't. I mean, I think for the reasons I've talked about, regulatory compliance and, especially US companies. But also you don't want people to stop doing their day job. You don't want people to go, we're going to get quiet. I can take it easy for a few months. And you also don't want, supposing the acquisition breaks, supposing it fails, you don't want people to go, no, we haven't been acquired, and now we need to kind of, carry on. Because, people have stock options, there is, there are implications for people in the event of an acquisition. So you don't want to build up people's hopes and then have a risk of dashing them. I think that again goes back to that. You've got to be a decent person.
Yeah. And I think also just having that, being at home, being stuck at home, working from home, is probably easier to hide such an acquisition if no one sees that you're spending 23, 22 hours at the office, in a team with lawyers in some meeting room, right?
Totally.
I'm assuming that's a lot easier. Now, I wanted to know, there's always talks about bigger companies coming in, and then there's always a talk of how much control and a strategic focus that new company then has in the direction in which the company that's being bought is going. And I kind of wanted to ask, is there now a big influence there, or is it more like, keep doing what you're doing great, and you're just part of the new company now? Everyone gets Microsoft badges now instead of Minit badges, and how does that new relationship look?
So again, a little bit coy. I don't want to give away.
Of course.
We have a plan. We have several plans. We have many plans. And I won't elaborate on what those are. But I think the answer is, somewhere in the middle. It's certainly not here you are now, off you go, and just carry on doing exactly that. We are now part of a wider software ecosystem. Microsoft has some very strong IP around the whole process insights business. I think the exciting thing for our customers, and I do view all this stuff through that prism of what can we bring to our customer base. There are some obvious, brilliant synergies between what we have around, Power BI and the Power Platform. Remember, Microsoft, acquired an RPA company, so we have Power Automate, now. And I think process mining fits very, very well into that ecosystem of the other, Power products.
Yeah.
The aim for us is always to bring, delight to our customers. So having us continue as a completely standalone product ad infinitum, I think is fairly obviously not an option. I think as you'll see over the next, over the months and years, you'll see our roadmap come out around of how how process mining integrates into those other very successful and very good Microsoft technologies.
Maybe I'm going to ask you if you could still unhide at least just a little sample or a little a drop of where could you even incorporate this technology into? Because, all we know are usually business processes. We work with process mining in business processes and so on and so forth. But seeing Microsoft stepping in, I could also see some other areas where process mining might not have been as prominent just yet. But the ideas, the way that the data are being processed, and the way that you're working with it could be interesting. And again, if you can share anything, just a small sample of what is going to be happening, I would love to hear it.
So I think it's probably an elaboration on what I've said. As you understand your business better, so we use process mining, we use instrumentation to let you understand how well your processes are working. I think it tees up your use of those other technologies. So for example, take Power Automate, great automation technology. You can apply it to, all sorts of different processes around finance, around logistics, HR, IT. Automation is, and this was my life at Automation Anywhere. Automation gives you a huge wealth of potential. There's a huge wealth of potential processes in a business you can automate. Process mining can serve as a searchlight for that. Can indicate where are those amazing automation candidates. Where should you be investing your time and effort around technologies like Power Automate within your business. So for me, there's one obvious thing there. How do we use process mining, Microsoft Process Mining, to guide businesses into where they can get the best out of their Power Automate deployments?
Mm-hmm. Now, James, if we look into the current process mining market, it's very interesting, and we are basically witnessing a lot of acquisition over the last couple of years. One of the first ones we've seen, Process Gold from Eric and van der Linden, who interestingly also had on our podcast already, 20 episodes ago. They were acquired by UiPath. We saw Sub buying Signavio. Now Minit bought by Microsoft, My Invenio bought by IBM, and I could go on because there's just so many things that are happening in the market. Could you find any silver lining or on when the market currently is, and especially and more importantly, where is it heading, and how are these strategic acquisitions impacting the market?
So it's a really good point, and we've seen this. We've seen process mining and, to maybe a lesser extent, task mining businesses being snapped up. Customers don't just want process mining. That's that as an underpinning. I think is a fundamental thing. Customers want lots of things. Yeah. The statement of record systems that we're talking about here, that are the main repositories and executable platforms for process within business. We're talking ERP platforms, CRM platforms. What customers want is they want that soup to nuts ability to understand and improve their processes. So really what a customer wants is they want an ERP platform. They want process mining to show them how well that's working. They want automation technologies to be able to, automate the bits that they need to automate, and. They need orchestration technologies to maybe make sure all those processes are working in lockstep across their business. So there is that big move by the big vendors to be able to offer more of that complete ecosystem than you could if you were just offering process mining, or just offering automation. So, UiPath buying Process Gold, for me, there's a fairly obvious move. I think they're still missing a few pieces, but IBM, Automation Anywhere, just made a small acquisition. That move to having big companies being able to offer ERP or CRM plus process mining plus automation plus orchestration, I think is a good thing for customers. And that's exactly, where we're going. I think Microsoft in many ways has actually a bit of an advantage in the market because we have all of that stuff plus more. We've got we've got Dynamics, we've got the Power Platform, we've got Power Automate. And I think Microsoft has really shown the way by making some very bold acquisitions in the, automation space, in various bits around the ERP, Suppleri, very interesting company that we acquired, and Minit. So I'm pretty happy here that the ecosystem we have is probably the most comprehensive one around. And I think for customers, that's a narrative they can really buy into. If you want to have a strong roadmap going forward, you want a vendor that is looking across all aspects of what you want and not just saying, well, I've got this bit and it might integrate with the bits around it. You want to make sure you've got those tight integrations across all those parts of that value chain, from that soup course through starters, main course, dessert and nuts. Yeah. And I think we're in a good position for that.
Right, so it's adding that extra brick in the suite of software that they already offer, getting a more cohesive kind of experience for the end user.
Yeah, I think so. At the end of the day, none of these systems work in isolation, and the tighter those systems are tied together, and the easier it is for you to realize business value out of them.
Mm. So, with the acquisition now, what does the future for Minit hold? What are you excited about? Where do you think the industry is going next now with this added capital or resources that Microsoft gives you? What do you think is going to be the next big thing here?
So for me, there are two things that really excite me. One is what I've just talked about, the ability to offer complete solutions to customers. Instead of saying, hey, we've got great process mining technology, the fact we can now deliver that, embedded, with Process Advisor that we've got, with Power Automate, with Power BI, people use Power BI across their whole businesses to give that visualization, that understanding of what's going on, us being able to integrate really tightly to that, hugely exciting. So that technical roadmap, for me, is absolutely mega. I'm really excited about that. The second thing is access to customers. Every company in the world, pretty much, is a Microsoft customer. And one of the hardest thing when you're a small vendor is it's the Camden Town pet shop experience. And that won't mean anything to you. It won't mean anything to anyone.
I lived there.
It won't mean anything to anyone apart from two people in their 80s, my parents, when they were first together back in the late 60s, before I was born. They went to a pet shop in Camden Town, and they wanted to buy a cat, and they picked the cat that kind of, every few seconds it would levitate over the top of the cage and kind of go meow, and it would do the same. And so they finally took the cat that kind of jumped the highest and yelled the loudest. And I think being a small vendor, a challenger, it can feel a bit like that. You've got great technology, you can give great outcomes for customers, but just trying to get noticed can be really hard. And you spend all this time and effort and marketing budget. You do trade shows, and you do above the line, you do below the line, you do brand, and you go all this stuff, and that can be exhausting. And I'm super confident in our technology. It works really well. We've got this great narrative. For me, the fact I now have access to all those customers, I can go and see these CIOs and CFOs and educate them and say, hey, listen, this is what we can offer you. Mm-hmm. That's really exciting. I can cut out the kind of trudging through the sand, trying to, get those meetings. I can go to the cool and interesting bit, which is helping customers, which is giving them great technology to deliver great outcomes to them. And that's fabulous.
Right.
So it's like trying to get your foot in the door before, but now you're in their living room.
Pretty. We're in the living room, we're in the kitchen, we're in the garage, wherever. But it's really, I think the best part of being, an executive in the technology business is delivering technology, is actually seeing real world outcomes. I remember the first time we sold a deal when I was at Automation Anywhere. We did a deal with Maersk, the big shipping company, and I was half a mile from my house, and I was waiting at the level crossing, and a whole bunch of train went past all these containers on, and there was Maersk, and I was like, hey, we're helping get that truck roll and get those containers. And it was quite cool. It's like we've actually delivered this real tangible, and I'm seeing the containers on the train in front of me. So I think delivering real world benefit, I think is a thrill. It's genuinely one of the reasons why I like doing what I do. Working for Microsoft gives me the ability to do that bigger, faster, wider, to scale, what I can do there, what I and my team can do. And that's really exciting.
Yeah, it does sound that you are very excited about what you do right now and where you are at. James, where can people eventually find you, find out more about what you're doing, or where would you send them?
If you Google for, Minit Process Mining, Microsoft, we're easy to find. For me personally, you can find me on LinkedIn, James Denning, Dening, spelt slightly differently from normal, but I'm on LinkedIn, easy to get a hold of. I don't hide my light under a bushel particularly.
Awesome. And James, I have one last question, because unlike our listeners, I can see that you have a huge library just behind you. What are you currently reading?
Oh, good question. Well, I've just finished the new Rivers of London book by Ben Aranovich, which is very good. And I'm just about to start reading rereading for about the fifth time, the First Law trilogy by Joe Abercrombie. My reading tends to be to relax and switch off. So it tends to be slightly crappy science fiction and fantasy. Well, not slightly crappy, very good science fiction and fantasy. Sorry, Joe. I think the Abercrombie, his first trilogy is one of the best things, and I've read an awful lot. On the business side, I've actually got, there's a great book called Legacy that I've just finished. It's the study of business from the point of view of the New Zealand All Blacks rugby team. I've played rugby all my life. One of my children plays rugby for England. Still don't get tired of saying that.
Nice.
Which is cool. Yeah, massive big bruiser. I mentioned her earlier. She's called Katie. The Legacy is a great book. It's about how the All Blacks, who are the most successful elite team of all time, they win 6 out of 7 matches they play against other elite opponents.
Right.
The next team, I think, is either Manchester United or Real Madrid. I think one of the American gridiron teams is up there as well. Mm-hmm. But they're at kind of 60%. The All Blacks are at 87%. And it's about humility. It's about leaving the shirt. You borrow the shirt and you leave that shirt in a better place than when you found it. And I think one of the first chapters is called Sweeping the Sheds. And at the end of every test match, and this includes World Cup finals, 2 of the senior players will take the 2 brooms, 2 big brushes, and after everyone's left the change rooms, they will sweep out the change rooms, which will be full of, grass and mud and bits of bandage and, bottles and stuff. But they will sweep them out. And the point is, never forget that humility. So Legacy, a brilliant book. I would thoroughly recommend it to everybody.
All right, James. Very inspiring words. Thank you very much for joining us in our podcast. It's been, I always say it's lovely, and I will just repeat it again. It's lovely to have you on. Thank you for joining us. And I wish you and Minit, and now actually Microsoft, to have as much success with the process mining and other technologies as possible.
Thank you very much.
All right. For the rest of you, dear listeners, thank you for listening and tuning in on Mining Your Business podcast. We are happy to have you. If you have any question, just feel free to reach out. We are very active on LinkedIn. You can also write us an email on miningyourbusinesspodcast@gmail.com. And if you have any questions, if you have some recommendations on who to invite next, just text us and we will be happy to serve you in this. So thank you very much. And I'll be looking forward to hear from you again in 2 weeks. Bye-bye.